Well, you asked for it, and here it is. In this video, I'm going to show you how to render beef fat into beef tallow. But there's a twist, because I'm also going to show you how to make beef broth at the same time. So let's dig in. A few weeks ago, I made a video about how to make homemade beef tallow soap. I'll leave a link for that video in the description. Several of you asked me to make a video about how to render the beef fat into tallow. So I'm going to do that today. So here it is. Beef tallow is a purified form of beef fat that's been slowly cooked down, strained, and turned into a shelf-stable cooking fat. It was a staple in kitchens for generations before vegetable oils took over. Tallow has a high smoke point, which makes it great for frying, roasting, and even baking. It adds a rich, savory flavor, and it lasts a long time when stored properly. And it's all the rage right now. And why is that? Well, one reason is because more and more people are concerned about the heavily processed seed oils like soybean, canola, and corn oil. These oils go through a lot of chemical processing, and some studies suggest that they may contribute to inflammation and other health issues when consumed in large amounts. On the other hand, animal fats, which for a long time had been out of favor, like beef tallow, are seeing a comeback. They're natural, traditional, and when sourced from grass-fed cattle, they're also full of fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K. Plus, tallow is stable at room temperature and it doesn't go rancid as fast as some plant-based oils. You can use it for cooking, and then of course you can also use it to make soap. And as I mentioned, I made a video about how to make soap from beef tallow, and I'll put the link for that in the description. The soap that you make from beef tallow is good and hard. You can make soap from something like olive oil, and it's really good for your skin, but it's kind of a soft soap that doesn't last very long. Tallow soap is really hard, and it lasts a long time. So by combining things together, like tallow for making the bar hard, olive oil for making a good conditioner for your skin, and something like coconut oil, because the coconut oil gives a good lather to the soap. By combining those different elements together, you can come up with a formula that makes an excellent soap that has all of the best characteristics of the different ingredients. So if you're trying to get back to basics and avoid ultra-processed foods, or just make use of every part of the animal, you're going to love learning how to render your own beef tallow. And hey, we're making beef broth at the same time, so nothing goes to waste. We recently got a quarter of a cow that was slaughtered and processed in our area. We split it up between different friends. Let me know in the comments if you're interested in learning more about that process. So anyway, as we were getting that cow, on the butcher's form, they asked if we wanted the fat. It was one of the options. And so we said, yeah, sure. We would love to do that. And we also got some bones, and we're going to try to render some fat and bone broth out of those too, so that's another option. Other ways that you could get some fat to use for rendering your own beef tallow are to ask your local butcher. A lot of times they trim off the fat and they just throw it away, or they use it for pet food. But if you ask, they might be happy to set aside some for you, sometimes even for free or for really cheap. You could also check with local farmers, especially those who raise grass-fed beef. They may be willing to sell you some of the beef fat directly, especially if they process animals on site or through a small local processor. You could also visit a specialty or ethnic grocery store. Those places often sell beef fat in the freezer section, and sometimes it's labeled as suet, which is one of the best forms of beef fat that you can get. The first thing you want to do is cut up the fat into small pieces. This helps the fat render faster and more completely. Believe it or not, this may actually be a bit easier to do when the fat is frozen or partially frozen, because it sort of firms it up and makes it less slippery. When it's cold, it holds its shape better and it slices cleaner, kind of like cutting up a block of cheese instead of trying to carve up warm butter. Put all the small pieces of fat, along with any of the meaty bits that stuck to it, into a large stock pot. You could also use a crock pot or a slow cooker for this, which is great if you want to just set it and forget it. Now, one thing that I'm doing that's a little different from most of the other videos that I've seen about rendering tallow is that I'm making beef broth at the same time. In a later step, I'll show you how to separate the two, but for now, it's important to use the right amount of water and salt. If you're not keeping the beef broth, that's not critical because you just strain all of the liquid away anyway. But since we're keeping the broth, we want it to be flavorful and not overly salty or too bland, so we want to get the ratios right. The salt and the water actually help draw off any of the impurities that are full of flavor, but we don't want them in the beef tallow. We want the beef tallow to just be pure fat so that it won't have any smells. It'll be a very neutral tasting, smelling substance. But we all want all this taste and the smells to be in the beef broth. And the water and the salt are going to help draw off all of that into the liquid. And the water and the salt is also going to form the base for our broth. So you want to get the ratios right. Add 1.5 teaspoons of salt and 1/2 quart of water per pound of fat. And now is where you're going to need some patience. You want to cook the fat slowly in the oven at a temperature between 170 to 225 degrees Fahrenheit. The lower temperature will take longer, but will give you a gentler render. The higher end of that range will go faster, but it risks scorching the fat, which can introduce a burnt smell or taste into your tallow. It took about 6 hours last time when I did this at 225 degrees Fahrenheit. This time I went lower and slower at 170 degrees, and it took 18 hours, but it was worth the wait. You want to be sure to check on your oven and your pot every hour or so, especially as it gets closer to being done. Give it a gentle stir every now and then just to help it to render out better. Remember, you're not trying to fry the fat or cook it, you're just wanting to melt it. You'll know it's getting close to being done when the fat turns golden and liquidy and the solid bits start to sink to the bottom or turn a light brown color. Once the fat is done cooking and rendering, it's time to separate the tallow from the broth. And here's how we do it. First, we're going to strain out any of the remaining chunks using a regular metal strainer or maybe a slotted spoon. Then I like to go back and strain it all a second time through cheesecloth, or you could use a coffee filter to catch any of the smaller bits and impurities that might be stuck in the liquid. This will help your tallow stay clean and be shelf stable for longer. You can save the solids called the cracklins. You could feed those to your chickens. You can add them as a supplement to your dog food, or even toss it into a batch of cornbread or scrambled eggs if you're feeling rustic and you want a little punch of flavor. With the liquid in a jar or a large bowl, let it cool a little bit on the counter while you're cleaning up, and then place the container in the refrigerator for several hours until the fat hardens. As it cools, the fat rises to the top and hardens while the broth sinks to the bottom and stays a liquid. Now you can remove the container from the refrigerator and separate the solid from the liquid. Gently lift off or break off the hardened fat on top. It may come off in one piece, or you may need to use a knife to slice the cake up into smaller pieces so you can get it out. Scrape any discoloration off of the bottom of the fat cake to make sure that you have made it as pure as possible. This is your rendered beef tallow. Set it aside on a plate. You may want to go through a second purification cycle by adding water and salt to it, melting it all down again, which won't take nearly as long this time. And then you can strain it again. You can harden it in the refrigerator again. The subsequent purification cycles will make the tallow more and more clean, and you can do that several times if you want. And the more times you do that, the more pure your tallow will be. Now you want to pour the broth into a clean jar to save. You could pressure can it for long-term storage. You could freeze it in freezer-safe containers, or you could keep it in the fridge for up to a week if you plan to use it soon. I decided to freeze mine in plastic freezer bags, and I decided that 2 cups was about the right amount for me. And there you have it, 2 old-fashioned, nourishing staples from one simple process: homemade beef tallow and delicious beef broth. Leviticus 3:16b through 17 says, "All the fat is the Lord's. It shall be a perpetual statute throughout all your generations, in all your dwellings, that you eat neither the fat nor the blood." In the Old Testament, God commanded that the fat from animal sacrifices be burned on the altar as an offering to Him. Why is that? Because in the ancient world, fat was considered the richest, most flavorful, and most prized part of the animal. It was the best. And God asked for the best. Not the leftovers, not the scraps, but the choicest portions as a sign of honor and worship. When I rendered tallow, I think about how intentional the process is. I think about the time and the effort and the patience it takes to extract the best from what might otherwise be thrown away. And it reminds me of this truth: God deserves our best too. Not just what's convenient, but what is best and what is meaningful. Whether it's our time, our energy, our talents, or our resources, the fat of our lives belongs to the Lord. And so today, as we work with our hands and we create something useful from what He has provided, we remember to offer God the best that we have in return. Now, let's get out there and let's grow and be fruitful.